By the way, someone says it's International Nurses Day because it's Florence Nightingale's birthday. Thank you both. It's been a pleasure having you on, Taber Khan and Jeremy Rook. You've been very cool. What happens? You're a farmer. What happens now? What does the diary say for the next couple of hours for you?
Well, it was funny that Taber said she's going feasting because I've had to bring Mary up and she insists we go out for a smart meal tonight. So
awesome.
We're booked in at the Central Power Station, I think it is, Bistro at 6 o'clock. So I'll go and wash down my dry mouth at the Masonic up the road, have a wee beer and then go out for dinner. Beautiful.
Good to have you on. Jeremy Rooks and Taber Khan, thanks for your time. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen, e haere nei. The race debate goes thermo-nuke in Parliament with calls for politicians to stop the descent into madness and get on with their jobs. New Zealand's just weeks away from hitting the 500,000 mark for COVID jabs. But how are supplies looking and when will under-16s be able to join the queue? Paying with plastic is about to get a little bit cheaper. From the naughty step to top of the class, the Education Minister unveils a chunky pay rise for early childhood teachers. Hundreds lie down to demand action, calling on the government to double funding for Pharmac. And the country's highest paid emergency housing provider goes bust. So where did all the money go? Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi has been kicked out of Parliament for doing a haka over what he claims is racist rhetoric. National leader Judith Collins was asking the Prime Minister about her views on the He Puapua report. Mr Waititi asked the Speaker to intervene in what he called racist propaganda against Māori, but Trevor Mallard ruled the views expressed weren't inappropriate. Mr Waititi then said views on Indigenous rights should only be determined by tangata whenua and was ejected from the House.
We are sick and tired of Māori being used as political footballs, to use Māori to gain the votes, Pākehā votes.
Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi. The He Puapua report provides recommendations to the government about how it can give effect to Māori self-sovereignty. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government continues to invest significant money in medicines, but demand will always outstrip funding. A petition presented to Parliament today, signed by 100,000 people, is calling on the government to double Pharmac's budget immediately and triple it within 3 years to just over $3 billion. Ms Ardern says the Labour-led government has increased funding to Pharmac by 25% a year, or more than $269 million in total.
But it is fair to say that the need and calls for new drugs is an endless one. There are significant new drugs constantly coming on stream.
Jacinda Ardern says the current independent review into Pharmac will make recommendations on whether change is needed. The Education Minister says funding for the early childhood sector will help to close the pay gap with school and kindergarten teachers. $170 million will be spent over 4 years to give early childhood teachers access to the first steps of the pay scale for kindergarten teachers. Chris Hipkins says the higher rates are available only to early learning services that agree to pay the higher rates. Businesses in the struggling retail sector will get some reprieve when new legislation caps fees charged on credit and debit card transactions. The merchant service fees charged by banks have been largely unregulated, and a retail payment scheme bill will be introduced later this year. The Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister David Clark says businesses are expected to save $74 million a year from lower fees.
Many of our small businesses are living on the edge here. This will make their lives simpler, but also in order to survive, they're going to have to pass on savings to their consumers in the competitive environment we see.
David Clark says the Commerce Commission will also be given powers to regulate and monitor the retail payment system. A decision is likely to be made tomorrow on whether nurses will strike after rejecting a pay offer from district health boards. The nurses' organisation has been balloting members on the possibility of industrial action and asking the government to treat its pay negotiations in good faith. Katie Todd reports.
It's the International Day of the Nurse today, yet the nurses' organisation says many of its members want to leave the profession or the country that values them so poorly. The union is voting on potential strike action after the government announced its 3-year public sector pay freeze last week. The nurses' organisation says it's not clear how that could affect its wage negotiations, and it doesn't want a predetermined outcome. The ballot closes at midday tomorrow. Ko Katie Todd, TNA.
The government is encouraging anyone with a severe reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine to report it to the Centre for Adverse Reactions Monitoring. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says side effects from the Pfizer vaccine are generally mild and short-lived.
But serious allergic reactions or serious events can occur, and those are particularly the ones that we record that are reported to our Centre for Adverse Reactions Monitoring, or CARM, which works with MedSafe to monitor the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine.
Ashley Bloomfield says anyone with a severe reaction should contact their GP and report their symptoms. It's 4 minutes past 5. The rescheduled Rugby World Cup to be held in October and November next year in New Zealand has been extended by 8 days to allow teams greater rest periods. All teams will be guaranteed a minimum of 5 rest days between matches, in line with the approach recently approved for the men's competition. Black Ferns captain Eloise Blackwell says at 30 years old, the additional rest and recovery days are welcome for her old body.
Previous World Cups I've been to, I think one game we had a turnaround of 3 days between a game, 3 to 4 days. So, and I know right back in the day, some of the girls backed up games the next day. It's good to see that well-being and the wellness of the players is at the forefront of their mind.
The Black Ferns are the defending champions and kick off the tournament on October 8th, 2022 at Eden Park. France-bound All Black midfielder Ngani Laumape has been left out of the Hurricanes lineup for Friday night's Trans-Tasman Super Rugby game against the Waratahs in Sydney. Laumape announced this week he's joining French club Stade Francais at the end of the competition. Coach Jason Holland has teamed up Peter Umanga Jensen and Billy Proctor in the midfield. The 20-time tennis Grand Slam winner Rafael Nadal has raised doubts about his participation in the Tokyo Olympics amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Nadal, who won a singles gold in Beijing in 2008 and added a doubles title in Rio de Janeiro 8 years later, says he has yet to decide whether he will go to Tokyo. Nadal says he would normally never think about missing an Olympics, but in the current climate, he needs to see how the situation unfolds over the next couple of months. That's the news.
The situation in Israel and Palestine spirals out of control.
The Israelis have to stop what they are doing, otherwise the Palestinians will react.
Australia's startling federal budget.
To carry that level of debt as a coalition government is extraordinary.
And are we unwitting backers of Myanmar's military?
If we're talking about war crimes or genocide, then it's not vague and it should have been clear to them.
A watchful eye. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now, the short forecast for a Met service to midnight tomorrow. The upper North Island from Taranaki, Taupo and Bay of Plenty northwards. Partly cloudy, a few showers, possibly heavy and thundery in Bay of Plenty and Taupo tonight. Clearing tomorrow morning to fine weather. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, occasional rain, possibly heavy overnight, easing to a few showers in Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Periods of rain clearing overnight. Generally fine tomorrow. Nelson becoming fine tonight with any patchy rain soon clearing. Marlborough and Canterbury, cloudy areas and a few showers clearing overnight. Fine tomorrow, apart from some coastal cloud. Bulla to Fiordland and Otago and Southland, fine with cloudy periods in Fiordland tomorrow. Chatham Islands, partly cloudy, a few showers clearing tomorrow morning. RNZ National. It's 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint e tēnei rā. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Coming up, COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins on why vaccines may run out in June. And Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi is kicked out of the House for doing a haka. He claims his party is sick of Māori bashing. But we begin tonight on the West Coast, where a man has today pleaded guilty to sexual abuse at the Gloria Vale Christian community. Much of the detail has been suppressed, but our reporter Tim Brown was in the Greymouth District Court this afternoon. Kia ora, Tim. What are you able to tell us?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, today's appearance follows an almost year-long investigation by police. The young man who appeared today and entered guilty pleas to 3 charges of indecent assault. They are representative charges, and the offending occurred between 2015 and 2018 when the offender himself was aged between 15 and 18. He has name suppression. That was granted on an interim basis last year, and that was finalised today.
And so what happens now, Tim?
The offender has been remanded on bail and ordered not to associate with his victims. He will come up for sentencing in September.
Thanks, Tim. That is Tim Brown joining us there from Arthur's Pass. The Māori Party says it's had enough of Māori bashing in the House. The frustration boiled over late this afternoon with co-leader Rawiri Waititi kicked out of the House for doing a haka, protesting against questions from the opposition about race-based policy. Judith Collins was asking the Prime Minister whether she agreed with recommendations in the He Puapua report, which suggests ways government can give effect to tino rangatiratanga by sharing power with iwi and hapu. Our political reporter, Mediana Johnson, reports.
Rawiri Waititi doing a haka in protest of questions on race-based policy. For 2 weeks straight, National Leader Judith Collins has used question time to ask the Prime Minister about the Māori Health Authority and recommendations from He Puapua. The Māori Party has been growing increasingly hoha, frustrated.
A point of order, Rawiri Waititi.
Mr. Speaker, I seek your guidance and advice. Over the past 2 weeks, there has been racist propaganda and rhetoric towards tangata whenua. That not only is insulting to tangata whenua, but diminishes the mana of this House.
The Speaker of the House, Trevor Mallard, says some views expressed in the House are uncomfortable for members of Parliament.
And there are almost certainly some views that were expressed earlier in my career that would now be regarded as out of order for the reasons that the member has expressed. In my view, we are not at that point now.
Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi interjected again when Judith Collins resumed and was warned by the Speaker litigation of the same point would put him at risk of expulsion. Waititi responded by saying only tangata whenua should be able to speak on Indigenous rights, which he followed up with a haka. He was kicked out of the House, with his co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Peka walking out with him.
It's not right that the Speaker hasn't got the courage to stop racism in the House. It's not right that we have to endure it. We said when we came into this House that there are things that we would never normalise, and especially for the next generation, and that's what our stand has to be all the time.
The Māori Party had the support of Green MP Te Anau Tuiono, who walked out in solidarity.
It's 2021, not 1921. We need to get on with it, and so does the National Party. It's time to join the future.
Waititi says tangata whenua are sick of being the subject of National Party politicking.
The opposition leader has been constantly bashing Māori to gain the votes of her Pākehā constituents, and that's all it is.
Judith Collins had this to say in response.
That's a very lazy categorisation, and I will not stop asking questions in Parliament about any constitutional changes that the government seems to be working on until the Prime Minister answers questions directly.
The protest led to a debate on a Speaker's ruling, which finds the Speaker can intervene if a personal reflection is offensive to the dignity of the whole House, such as lying or racism. Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson says the standard of the House is being brought down by harmful racist narratives. But ACT Party MP Nicole McKee, who's also Māori, says debate mustn't be stifled.
I do not find some of the comments that have been made as being racist, but rather looking at
ways of working through solutions to the issues that have been put in front of us. And the representatives for the minority walked out of this House.
Trevor Mallard has ruled that while MPs need to take care with how they express themselves, he will not ask any MP to refrain from suggestions that policies are race-based, nor will he call on politicians to stop saying the views of other members are racist. He says that will get the balance right. I parimata mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
It's 13 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National, and still to come on the programme we'll speak to the National Māori Authority, which is calling on politicians to end the race debate and get on with their jobs. The executive principal and deputy principal of a prestigious private school have been absent for weeks, and questions are being raised about where they are. Dale Burden and his wife Yvette Williams led St Peter's School in Cambridge. Our reporter Nick Trubridge is outside the school and joins us now. Hi Nick, what can you tell us so far?
Hi Lisa, well for the most part our questions to the executive that's taken over here have gone unanswered when it comes to the whereabouts of Mr Burden and Ms Williams. But what I can tell you tonight is that Checkpoint has multiple sources connected to St Peter's School community who suggest that there is a bullying issue among staff at the school. So that is the new information I can tell you. It's fair to say though, Lisa, that for the most part there's sort of a veil or sort of a code of silence amongst most people at the school. We tried speaking to parents as they were doing the school pickup today. The vast majority of them have frankly no idea what's going on. There's been no confirmation around the principal and his deputy's whereabouts. And students, as they were leaving the school, we could see teachers saying to those students, keep walking, do not speak to media. So Lisa, that is sort of the message here, and the general vibe is tight-lipped.
What do you know about this couple?
Yeah, Lisa, we know that obviously Mr Burden is the principal. There are a number of deputies at the school. So Ms Williams is one of the deputies at the school, one of about, from what I could see, 6 or 7. We know that Mr Burden was headmaster at Mount Albert Grammar in Auckland for a number of years, and by all accounts he ran a really tight ship at that school and really turned it around, Lisa. We do also know though that this case is quite a sensitive one. We were talking to the comms director here at St Peter's in Cambridge just before coming on air, and she was pointing out the fact that they do have a child at the school, which is why they are treading fairly sensitively, Lisa. But we are still making a number of inquiries with the school. There's about 1,100 to 1,200 pupils at this school, so as you can imagine that is a large community of parents who simply want to know what is going on at the head of their children's high school, Lisa.
Thanks, Nick. That is Nick Trubridge, who was joining us from Cambridge outside St Peter's School there. The COVID vaccine rollout should hit the 500,000 jab mark within the next fortnight. Although only 120,000 people have had their second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. The government announced the numbers at its regular briefing today and has also conceded it's expecting supplies to run low of the vaccine before the next big restock around July. I asked COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins what his latest forecasts are for getting through everyone eligible for the jab.
Forecasts show them ramping up quite rapidly in July and August. We've gone in the last few weeks from doing sort of 5,000 to 6,000 a day to doing, up to 16,000 a day. I think that was the peak that we reached on Friday. We expect to see that kind of steady climb up continue. The biggest thing holding us back at the moment is being able to get hold of the vaccines. We're not expecting big deliveries of the vaccine until the beginning of July.
We'll get to the supply in a second, but even if you were to double those numbers, right, on the current DHB projections, if those go through until July, if you meet those projections, you still would have to vaccinate 40,000 people a day to complete the remainder by the end of the year. Is it pie in the sky to think you're going to get through us all by December?
Oh, we started to head up into 20 to 30,000 people a day from sort of when we start getting the big deliveries in July. Through August, that'll continue to ramp up. By September, we should be doing consistently around 50,000 people plus per day. We will have some big events. I think we'll see more vaccination events and weekends. At the moment, weekend vaccination rates are pretty low. And actually, I think what we'll see is that when we've got a bigger supply of vaccine, we'll see this as much more a 7-day-a-week operation.
So you think you can still do it by end of December?
Look, it's going to be challenging, but we're certainly going to be aiming to complete it by the end of the year.
How much vaccine have you got in the fridge right now?
About 350,000 doses as of late last night, but we are now in the point where we're delivering more vaccines on a weekly basis than we're receiving. So we typically receive between 60 and 70,000 a week at the moment, and we're well up doing over 80,000 a week. So those numbers, and actually that number's continuing to grow. So that little stockpile that we've got by mid to late June will pretty much have disappeared. And so at the moment, I think we're on track to match about right by the end of June. There's a possibility that we may have to slow down a little bit in the last week or two of June while we wait for more to get into the country.
So just to be clear, do you actually have enough supply to vaccinate all the people who are eligible in the categories that you're calling to come forward now?
No, not in the third group. We said that we start the third group in May, which we're underway in some areas with that, but we won't have enough to finish that group until we start getting the bigger deliveries in July and August.
So if everyone comes forward, not everyone would be able to get it?
No, that's right. So we've always been pretty clear about that.
So what, are you pulling the handbrake on and asking some people to sit back for a little bit?
No, I mean, ultimately the capacity. So through the bookings and through, what spots are available for people to vaccinate, to receive a vaccine rather, that's how we manage that.
So how are you prioritising then within those eligible groups if you don't have enough to do everybody? Should they all come forward?
District health boards manage that through booking systems and the like. Not everybody is going to be able to get the vaccine in the first week that we start vaccinating the fourth group either. So it is going to be a case of working through this over a period of months.
What volumes of the Pfizer vaccine are you expecting when you say that you're expecting, to get down near to zero by about end of June, around June? How much are you expecting to come in?
That's not absolutely locked in at this point. What we know from Pfizer is when they give us a delivery schedule, they'll typically stick to it. We haven't yet got the confirmed delivery schedule for July. What they have indicated to us, though, is that through July, August and September, so through that 3-month period, they would envisage delivering us the balance of our vaccination order. And so, if you spread that out across, as they did with the deliveries for the first, part of the year, first half of the year, spread that out across, it means that we could be getting deliveries of around, 500,000 vaccines a week, but that's not all locked in or confirmed yet.
So they haven't actually committed to delivery dates or actual volumes at this stage?
What they've said is that they'll give us the balance of our order in that period of time, in that 3-month period, and tentatively indicated that it will be spread through that time. But the actual, this many doses on this particular date is not 100% confirmed. What we've found from working with Pfizer is that they have been very, very reliable. Once they've given us a commitment, they'll stick to it. But they are very careful in making sure that the commitments that they give, they absolutely can lock them in.
Have they indicated any supply chain issues? Because people will be watching, obviously, the stories from India, and some vaccinations are made in India. Where is ours coming from?
Ours is coming from Europe, and no, Pfizer have indicated to us very clearly that they don't think that our supply will be disrupted.
You have said today that you really don't want to waste vaccines, right? And Dr. Bloomfield said in some cases we're squeezing another extra dose out of the vials. What level of wastage do we have right now?
Very, very low. I think our wastage rate is below 3%. Internationally, that's one of the lowest in the world. You see much higher wastage rates in other places. So the very careful management we've got of our inventory is serving us well in that regard.
Do you fear that there will be a point where you have no stocks in the fridge and you are waiting for Pfizer to deliver? That could happen, couldn't it, based on what you're saying?
There is a possibility that towards the end of June we'll be very low on stock. I don't think we'll completely run out, but we may have to slow down for a little bit. We'll know if we're going to get to that point, and at that point we would start to slow down for a period.
Would you ring fence an emergency supply that you just keep there?
Well, one of the things that we want to do, of course, is if we got to a period where we thought we were going to run very low, we may stop doing new vaccinations and just focus on giving people their second dose so that they can get their second dose within that period of time. But again, that's hypothetical at this point, but there are plans in place to do that if we need to.
Yes, but you would be wanting to, have contingency plans. So I hear what you're saying about not giving the second doses if you come to that, but would you keep a stockpile so that New Zealand is not in a situation where it has zero vaccines? And if so, how many would you keep as a safety net?
Ultimately, we are pretty confident. Well, we are very confident that we're going to get the big deliveries starting from July onwards, and so that's what we're working to.
When will you start looking at under 16s? Because the FDA is looking at approving Pfizer for 12 to 15-year-olds, potentially in a week or so's time. How far off is New Zealand in addressing that?
So we're in a comparable state to the way we were when Pfizer was first approved by the FDA. The FDA used an emergency approval to get vaccination underway in the US. We didn't do that. We ran our regular MedSafe approval process. We will do that for the 12 to 16-year-olds as well. MedSafe have started that process. They're expecting, I believe, to get the data through from Pfizer in the next week or two from their trials, and then that plays a very big role. So the feedback that I've had is that within the next month or two, they'll make a decision on that. If they were to approve the use of the Pfizer vaccines for the 12 and above age group, we will have enough vaccines coming in from July onwards to be able to add them to our vaccination program without having to disrupt the rollout to other people.
Minister, I'm just curious, how far off does your planning still include MIQ? Like, for example, what is your longest hotel contract?
We've given them funding to run through into sort of around April, May next year, and we haven't yet made decisions on whether we think that we're likely to be there beyond that. With our contracts with the hotels, I think the longest contract runs into towards mid next year, but we've got exit clauses in all of those, so that in the event we discover we don't need to have all of that hotel capacity, we can wind much of that back.
Will you still need MIQ mid next year?
I think it's likely we're going to need MIQ into the new year. How far into the new year, I don't yet know.
So you can't tell us if we'll still be in this position in December of next year?
No, I couldn't. Look, at this point, I think that's one of the worst scenarios. One of the better scenarios would be, us starting to wind back the restrictions at the border late this year and early next year. That won't be completely, there won't be a big magic moment where we cut a ribbon at the airport and say, right, all border restrictions are off. I think it's likely to be a series of changes over a period of time.
And that was the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins. Homai o whakaaro. I'm really interested in your thoughts on this. So the Minister there saying that they've got contracts in place with MIQ hotels till about May next year and options to go until mid next year. He's suggesting that we'll still have restrictions on the border with some adjustments. Let us know your thoughts on that, and also his comments around vaccine supply and how the rollout is going. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. An Auckland property company, which took millions in taxpayer funds to house the homeless, has left the IRD and landlords out of pocket after going into liquidation. Silverfern Property Services provided emergency accommodation until mid last year through houses it rented across South Auckland. Tenants who stayed there described many of the homes as substandard, despite Silverfern receiving nearly $2,000 a week for their stays. Now the company's folded. Questions are being asked about where that money went and if they'll face the same consequences as beneficiaries for failing to pay their bills. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Silverfern Property Services has received more than any other outfit for emergency housing, $14.7 million. They took roughly $2,000 a week per client from the Ministry for Social Development to put them in rentals across South Auckland. Tenants who stayed there have contacted Checkpoint describing unsafe and unhygienic conditions. And social worker Alistair Russell says what he saw wasn't fit for people to live in.
Debris around the outside of the houses were in many cases unclean, without proper and functioning utilities, etc. These guys were rogues.
But despite the conditions, MSD continued to dole out the cash to Silverfern Property Services, $12 million in the 18 months to June. They even got $50,000 in wage subsidies during the Level 4 lockdown. After that lockdown lifted, MSD moved its clients out of rental properties and into other motel rooms, drying up Silverfern's cash flow. Now the company has gone bust, and liquidator Grant Reynolds says he's trying to figure out how.
Well, that's something I can't really comment on at the moment because I'm still waiting on all of the financial records. But from the amounts that the company were being paid, you would expect that it would be profitable.
In its liquidation report, Silverfern says it became insolvent when the government cancelled its emergency housing because it had long-term leases with landlords which it couldn't meet. It also alleges emergency housing tenants damaged the leased properties, which it had to fix. The company's only listed shareholder, Zabeen Andaz, refused to be interviewed for this story, but last year told RNZ the $2,000 cost per week of each tenancy was necessary.
It shouldn't be going out of the company's pocket. The amount of rubbish that we see, the stolen items and lots of damages. And we look after the utilities, everything. So I can explain you that the money is going well used and it's not mainly just for profit.
But Alistair Russell says that attitude is astounding.
The bad behaviour of some individuals in emergency housing pales into insignificance versus the bad behaviour of these people who have made a fortune out of the misery of others.
And he wants the Ministry for Social Development to pursue fraud charges.
These guys have ripped off the system by essentially going bankrupt, walking away probably with the money stashed away in bank accounts and laughing all the way to the bank.
Creditors are already starting to come forward to make claims over failed payments. Grant Reynolds says so far they include around half a dozen landlords and the IRD.
I have spoken with Inland Revenue and I believe there is a tax debt there. I just don't know what the amount is at this time.
Last year, Silverfern Property Services told Checkpoint it would be returning its wage subsidy payment, but has yet to do so. In a statement, a spokesperson for the Social Development Minister, Carmel Sepuloni, said the Office of the Auditor General was investigating MSD's use of private rentals for emergency housing, which included properties associated with the Silverfern Property Group. They said any suggestions of fraud on behalf of Silverfern were a matter for the New Zealand Police. For Checkpoint, Corneta Blakeperson, Aho.
Lying down to demand action. In 11 towns and cities across the country, people made an impassioned plea for the government to double Pharmac's funding and triple it within 2 years. In the capital, about 200 people braved the rain to deliver the petition to Parliament. Our reporter Ruth Hill and cameraman Dom Thomas were there.
People of all ages and walks of life, some in wheelchairs, some carrying small children or photos of their dead, joined the short hikoi up the hill to Parliament. Those who could lay down on thoughtfully provided tarpaulins as the rain fell and MPs from across the political divide looked on. They began by reading the names of nearly 50 people who had died while waiting for drugs to be funded. Those people represented by unlit candles and framed photographs arranged on the steps. 10-year-old Raika Tolic told the crowd it was his third time at Parliament to support his mother Fiona, who was diagnosed with the muscle wasting disease spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, at the age of 30.
She is the strongest person I know, but my country is breaking her, and I hate NZ for doing this. I am so proud of my mum, but I don't want to carry on her legacy. I want her legacy to be left while she is still here. I want this problem to be solved before anyone else I love is impacted. I don't want to take on this job because I want our government to do what's right and not have people to beg.
The drug Spinraza, which is used to treat SMA, is funded in Australia and 56 other countries. Auckland grandmother Judy Lawrence came to Parliament today for the sake of her 18-year-old granddaughter Natalie, who has SMA.
I'm here because my granddaughter has a rare disease, spinal muscular atrophy, and there's a drug that's used worldwide, Spinraza, which isn't funded in this country. So she, along with a lot of other children from New Zealand, are now medical refugees in Australia.
Bella Powell, who's 17, was born with the deadly lung disease cystic fibrosis.
I am forking out money beyond my imagination every 3 months just to breathe. My drug is not even on the Pharmac funding list yet, and I don't have time to wait for it to be.
A petition by the lobby group Patient Voice Aotearoa calling for an independent review of Pharmac has so far been signed by more than 100,000 people. They want the government to immediately double the drug buying agency's budget and then triple it within 3 years. That would take public drug funding to over $3 billion. The group's spokesperson, Malcolm Mulholland, remortgaged his house to pay for drugs for his wife, Wiki, who has stage 4 breast cancer. He's not impressed at Pharmac's claims that New Zealanders are paying much less for their drugs than other countries.
Do we actually know what prices they pay for their drugs? No, we don't, because it's not transparent enough. I understand that there is commercial sensitivity around this, but when I look at the long list of people who have lost their lives because they couldn't get a drug that's funded overseas, people are left here scratching their head and going, we're just going without. That's the policy. Either Pharmac has the money or you don't get it. And sadly, a lot of people are not getting the drugs that they need.
The protesters had a sympathetic reception from MPs from across the political divide, with the Greens' Marama Davidson sharing an umbrella with ACT leader David Seymour. Health Minister Andrew Little acknowledged the incredible dedication of the people who had come to make what he called this important protest, and his parliamentary colleagues who had made their commitments to making things better.
And it is right that we are all held to account, government and opposition, to make sure that the decisions made by people in this building behind us serve the needs of you, your whānau and families, your communities, and all New Zealand. And I'll stand with you to strive to continue to do that.
However, one protester was to have the last word, pushing to the front of the crowd to address the minister directly.
It's too late. The government needs to do something about this. It's too late for them. The people that need this stuff now need it now. Sort it out. Be kind.
No one from Pharmac was available for interview, but in a written statement, its chief executive, Sarah Fitt, said while the agency recognises the challenges faced by patients, its job is to look at all the evidence and make decisions in the interests of all New Zealanders. She notes there will always be more medicines than they want to fund, and that means sometimes they need to make difficult decisions. Meanwhile, the independent review into Pharmac commissioned by the government is due to make its interim report in August, with a final report in December. Funding is excluded from the review. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
And if you were listening to that story from Ruth and Dom, we'll put the video up on our Facebook page. Kia ora, e te iwi e haere ake nei Checkpoint, the chair of the National Māori Authority, on who's playing the race card. Paying with plastic is about to get a little cheaper, and more on the government's vaccine rollout targets. Homai o whakaaro, we'd love to hear from you. You can send us your feedback via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or there's always email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines with Susanna.
Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi has been ejected from Parliament after protesting what he calls a constant barrage of insults to tangata whenua. He asked the Speaker to intervene after the National Party leader questioned the Prime Minister about race-based policy. But Trevor Mallard ruled the views expressed were not inappropriate. Mr Waititi then said views on Indigenous rights should be determined only by tangata whenua and was ejected from the House after doing a haka. Health Minister Andrew Little says Pharmac strives to spend its $1 billion budget to provide maximum support to the maximum number of people. He was responding to a 100,000 signature petition presented to Parliament today asking for the agency's budget to be doubled. The government says an independent review currently underway will recommend any changes needed. The Commerce Minister says retailers can expect to save $74 million a year from lower fees. David Clark says legislation to be introduced introduced later this year will cap fees charged on credit and debit card transactions. He says the Commerce Commission will also be given powers to regulate and monitor the payment system. A 21-year-old man has pleaded guilty to sexual offending at the Gloria Vale Christian community on the West Coast. The man entered the pleas to 3 representative charges of indecent assault against teenage boys in the Greymouth District Court this afternoon. The offending occurred between 2015 and 2018. The man has been remanded on bail and will be sentenced in September. Nurses will decide tomorrow whether to strike after rejecting a pay offer from district health boards. The nurses' organisation has been balloting members on the possibility of industrial action and asking the government to treat its pay negotiations in good faith. The Education Minister says new funding for early childhood education will help close the pay gap between kindergarten and other teachers of preschool children. Chris Hipkins has announced $170 million over 4 years to give thousands of early childhood teachers pay parity with school and kindergarten teachers. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, called Lisa Owen tēnei. And it is time for the business news, and Nona Peltz has joined me in the studio. Let's talk about PushPay, right? So this is a mobile payments company, and its profits have almost doubled in the past year.
95% increase to $42.9 million. So now that's a US-based company, but it is a New Zealand business. They make their money out of a software product where people who, go to church and so on want to provide a donation can use their app for that purpose. And they've done very, very well because...
So no more shaking of the dish anymore and fishing a few coins out of your pocket.
Right.
It's all electronic or going that way.
Well, it has been for a while, but it's been given a big boost in the past year because of COVID. So people have been moving on to digital services, and PushPay is one of those services. And it's doing quite well in the United States. So it's looking at expanding its service in the future. And so overall it did really well, and it ended up, the share price ended up nearly 2% today to $1.64, which is a pretty good result considering overall the share markets are down in this region. Asia's hit, I guess, about a 1-month low for the second day in a row. And that's because there's increasing concern about inflation and how that might lead to higher interest rates, which we haven't had for a long time. The interest rates have been low. They dropped, of course, during the COVID year, and they've remained there. Now, suddenly, there's a concern that inflation pressures are building, and that can move the other way. And so that's put the scare into the markets. And certainly we dropped more than 0.5% today, 75-point drop to 12,564.
Okay. Now, the other big story today is the solar power company, right?
Yes.
And why do they think they're going to shake up the generation sector?
Well, they're going to invest $300 million, and they're going to build 5 different solar farms. And
they are?
They're a company called Lodestone Energy. They're Auckland-based, and they've been backed by private investors. And they think that they can generate 400 gigawatts, which is enough to power about 55,000 homes. We're talking about a center the same size as, say, Hamilton. Mm-hmm. And they're expecting to sell their generation to, local on-sellers, retailers, and so on. So wholesale to retail to consumers. And they expect that they're going to start building these 5 sites from the end of the year. And so they're building one in Coromandel, one in the eastern, they're going to build 5 in Northland, in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, and Coromandel. And it's kind of interesting to me because I know we've done stories in the past about why we don't have solar energy. And I've heard people say, well, it's because our land is so expensive. So I don't know exactly how they plan to make this work, but they think that they're going to be able to use the land as well as continue with farming. So...
Wow, that's an interesting double purpose to
Well, yes, I thought so too. So I thought I'd mention that. And I guess it's going to, time will tell how they turn out. There you go.
All right. Well, you told us about the market, but what about the dollar?
Well, the dollar is just a touch weaker against the U.S., and that's partly because if interest rates move up, it will happen in the U.S. before anywhere else, and that would drive up the value of the dollar. So people are hedging a little bit there. So we were at 72.3. And that's not a big drop from where we have been, but a little steady against the Australian at 92.8 and 51.2 British pence.
Don't forget the 0.2, Nona.
I won't forget that.
Nona Balsio with Business News. And let's stick with the dollars and cents. The no pay wave sign may soon become a thing of the past as new legislation to regulate transaction charges is announced. Caps will be set on the amount banks can charge retailers for credit and debit payments. Lowering these fees is expected to save businesses $74 million a year, with the hopes the savings will be passed on to consumers. Video journalist Simon Rogers and reporter Amy Williams filed this report.
The Bluffies are flying out the door at this downtown Auckland restaurant overlooking the ferry terminal. But each time a customer pays for their order with a credit or debit card, this restaurant counts the cost. The Shaka Brothers and Island Gelato co-owner Jeff Tippett says any reduction in merchant service fees will be a relief.
Because we're a high volume PayWave customer, it's a huge saving for us. It's probably the one block to going fully card only without cash is the cost of the PayWave fees. Considering everything else has been going up since in the last year and everything, this is kind of a good relief actually, light relief.
He says more people are using contactless payments since the pandemic, resulting in more fees for the business.
Downtown here in Auckland hasn't just been about COVID. The no tourists and the roadworks, that kind of thing, have all been pretty hard to sort of handle in the local hospital industry. So any saving on that kind of thing is fantastic.
Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister David Clark says COVID-19 has changed the way people pay.
People have shifted from the EFTPOS system, which was the dominant system previously, increasingly to contactless methods of payment. That has a really direct impact on small businesses, on retailers, and we think they need a fair deal.
It doesn't cost businesses if you swipe or pop your debit card in the EFTPOS machine, but the banks charge them for contactless and credit card payments. And right now the amount is unregulated. Whilst many businesses absorb the cost, others pass it on to the consumer, adding a percentage for those types of transactions. But it's hoped the new Retail Payment Systems Bill, which will be introduced later this year, will make that a thing of the past. It aims to bring the amount merchants pay banks for card transactions in line with Australia and is expected to save businesses $74 million a year. It's hoped some of which will be passed on to consumers. Retail NZ Chief Executive Greg Harford says it's been a long time coming.
This is really positive news for the retail sector. We've been campaigning for lower merchant fees for some time. It's great that we're seeing decisive action by the government, which hopefully will flow through into some lower fees being charged by merchants, and ultimately consumers will benefit from that.
Mr Clark says the government's been forced to introduce regulations because banks didn't voluntarily reduce fees.
I expect the banks to start moving. They are profitable in Australia, where fees in many of these cases are about half what they are here. In the UK, in some cases, I think there's room for movement.
The Commerce Commission will also be given powers to regulate and monitor the retail payment system. Mr Clark says consumers should expect any cost savings to be passed on.
I expect retailers to pass on their savings to consumers. They are in a competitive market. Many of our small businesses are living on the edge here. This will make their lives simpler, but also in order to survive, they're going to have to pass on savings to their consumers in the competitive environment we see.
Retailers also face hefty fees for buy now, pay later. Greg Harford says there's more work to do to reduce costs for businesses.
This is a great first step. I think we'd really like to encourage the government to be looking at the whole of the merchant fee that is being charged, not just the interchange component of that. But there's also a need, I think, in the medium term to be looking pretty closely at those buy now, pay later schemes as well. The fees associated with those are substantially higher even than for credit cards, and there's some real questions as to why that is.
Mr Clark confirmed he is looking closely at buy now, pay later fees. The full regulatory regime for merchant service fees will come into effect next year. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
It is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, if you're listening to Simon and Amy's piece on radio, we'll put the video on our Facebook page so you can check it out. He muriaki e ngā pitipiti kōrero after the news at 6. The National Māori Authority wants politicians to end the race debate and get on with their jobs. Thousands of early childhood teachers will get a pay rise next year thanks to a $170 million funding boost announced by the government today. Education Minister Chris Hipkins says the money will be used to give teachers at least the same pay as the first 6 steps on kindergarten teachers' 11-step pay scale. That gives them pay parity with kindergarten and school teachers with the same qualifications and experience. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, we are glad to see you. Haere mai, haere mai.
That's the sort of greeting an Education Minister gets when he's about to announce $170 million in pay rises. Chris Hipkins was at the Capital Kids Cooperative Early Childhood Centre in Wellington to tell teachers and children that the government is bankrolling pay parity for thousands of early childhood teachers.
We will be introducing a new funding rate, a new higher funding rate for services, ECE services that are paying their staff at least the first 6 steps on the kindergarten teacher salary scale. That significantly moves us towards pay parity. It means that teachers working in non-kindergarten ECE services should, if they've been working for 6 years, be paid at least what a kindergarten teacher who'd been working for 6 years would be.
He says the government will give the extra money only to employers who agree to pass it on to their teachers. The same arrangement applied to last year's budget boost that gave first-year early childhood teachers pay parity with new kindergarten and school teachers. First-year teacher Hannah Pilcher says today's announcement means she'll keep pay parity for the next 5 years of her career, and that's worth thousands of dollars.
An incredible amount of difference. I mean, rent in Wellington is ridiculous, and we're all renting in the sort of central area, so it's tough. And, you know, we've all studied for 3 years. We would think that our pay should reflect that. I'm glad to hear that it's finally starting to get towards that point.
Chloe Lundy-Hodge is an early childhood teacher and the Wellington region representative for the Educational Institute. She says the extra funding will affect a lot of people.
It's going to mean hundreds that I know of personally through union membership, but I know that teachers who are not yet in the union, it's going to be thousands in the Wellington area that are going to be affected, especially our beginning teachers and teachers just starting out on their career. I think it's going to give them a real moral boost that their work is valued by the government.
She says some of those teachers are in for big pay rises.
Just looking at the numbers that I've just seen this morning, I think even in my own centre there's going to be 2 or 3 of our teachers that might even get a $5,000-$6,000 pay rise, which is exceptional for them, and I'm really happy for them.
Today's announcement comes hot on the heels of the government's controversial decision to restrict public sector pay rises. Chris Hipkins says the two moves are not at odds.
One of the things that we said in the pay restraint guidance that we issued last week was that this is exactly the area we want to focus on. We want to focus on low pay. We want to focus on workforces where there are significant pay equity or pay parity challenges. And this is exactly the sort of area we want additional funding to be channeled towards.
He says the government wants to go further with pay parity, but that's likely to require a major overhaul of the early childhood funding system. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Now, a few of you are getting in touch about our earlier interview with Chris Hipkins. He's wearing his other hat for that interview, COVID-19 Response Minister. We were talking about the vaccine rollout, the time it's taking, and whether we're going to come up short with doses before we get to the end of the year. Now, Helen says, today at the new Birkenhead Vaccine Centre, people without a call-up or an appointment, they were able to queue and get their first jab. I know this as my friend texted me while waiting. The COVID phone line person said this isn't possible and I'd need to wait despite being group 3. So there's a disconnect there, said Helen. Now that's interesting, Helen, because the Minister said at his media briefing today that they are discouraging people just walking up for appointments because they don't have the capacity. Now, Susan's also got in touch to say border opening gradually as conditions allow is sensible. Vaccine rollout painfully so slow, says Susan. Justification for this is inadequate, not okay. Lots of others getting in touch as well, so hopefully we'll get to that a little later in the programme. The UN has warned the violence between Israel and Palestinians is moving towards full-scale war. An Israeli airstrike destroyed a 13-storey building in Gaza City, following a warning to residents to get out. The Palestinian militant group Hamas retaliated, firing rockets towards Tel Aviv. More than 30 people have been killed in the recent violence. 3 people have been killed in Israeli areas, while at least 30 Palestinians have been killed by Israel airstrikes. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Palestinians will pay what he calls a very heavy price. The BBC's Tom Bateman reports from Jerusalem.
A street ablaze on Israel's normally bustling coastline. People run for shelter. Others have a lucky escape. But in a nearby suburb, a woman was killed as a building took a direct hit. In a single barrage, militants fired 130 rockets from Gaza deep into Israel. A clear sign both sides were into a round of steep escalation.
Hamas and Islamic Jihad have paid, and I tell you here, they will pay a very high price for their aggression. I say here tonight, their blood will be on their heads.
Earlier, Israel struck a Gaza tower block, which had been evacuated. It was home to members of the Palestinian militant group Hamas, which warned it would target Tel Aviv if the building was hit. Israeli airstrikes have pounded Gaza. Panic arrives here just after the warplanes. Inside this block, says Israel, 3 militant leaders were killed. Some of the worst fighting in years is leaving lives scattered. Among Gaza's victims, 11-year-old Hussein Hamad. Why did you kill him? Asks Hussein's uncle. They kill, and there is no one to make them answer for it. The whole world is watching. Israel says Hamas is endangering civilians on both sides with its rocket fire. It follows weeks of boiling tensions in Jerusalem, always at the heart of this conflict. It had spilled over at Al-Aqsa Mosque compound with further confrontation before dawn today. With the fighting reaching a fierce level of intensity tonight, both sides are vowing to continue their attacks.
Tom Bateman reporting. At least 7 children and 2 adults have been killed in a shooting at a school in Russia. More than 20 others have been injured and some children jumped out of a 3rd-floor window to get away. Police have arrested the suspected attacker, a 19-year-old former pupil. He'd been carrying an automatic weapon and wearing an explosive vest. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg has more.
A day of learning turned into a day of bloodshed. School number 175 had come under attack. When the shooting began, there was panic. Some children barricaded themselves in classrooms and then escaped this way, down a ladder.
There were screaming children running under your apartment. Children were running on the sport grounds and they were running to the fence and getting over the fence, screaming, "Oh my God, they're killing us." The little girl screamed, and that was the moment I realized that's not some sort of, accident.
Some of the school children waited inside to be rescued. 10th grader Elisa says she felt stress and panic as she hid in a room. At one point, the gunman had banged on the door. The attacker, former student Ilnaz Galeviev, was eventually arrested. Under interrogation, he's said to have claimed he believed he was God and consumed by hatred. All day, people have been coming to the school to honour the victims. Set up outside this makeshift shrine. Flowers, soft toys, and one Russian word, skorbim, we mourn. What happened here has shocked not only this city, but the entire country. In Russia, school shootings are relatively rare. And in response to this tragedy, President Putin has ordered an urgent review of gun control laws. Kazan is struggling to come to terms with this tragedy. The question you hear most here is why?
The BBC's Steve Rosenberg with that report from Kazan. Petrol prices in the US are the highest they've been in nearly 6 years, supercharged by panic buying in the wake of a cyber attack on one of the country's main fuel pipelines. Demand is so high, some stations are running out of petrol. CNN's Pete Muntean has more.
The latest problem caused by the Colonial Pipeline hack is panic at the pump, with lines at some stations getting longer. The 5,500-mile pipeline supplies about 45% of all fuel used on the East Coast.
Yeah, it looks like they just ran out. They charged me 11 cents.
Even though experts say the rush is not necessary for now. The White House insists there are no widespread fuel shortages, but that has not stopped people from buying gas fast. Oil analysts tell CNN that will lead to more than 1,000 stations running out of gas soon, with the biggest impacts in Georgia and Tennessee. On Monday, demand jumped 40% in 5 states, from Florida to Virginia.
It is a very serious problem right now.
84-year-old Bill Holtzman has spent his entire career distributing gas to stations in Virginia. But with the Colonial Pipeline mostly offline, Holtzman's trucks are now scrambling to fill up elsewhere. Holtzman says this Colonial terminal in Fairfax, Virginia, is now dry.
Our goal is to not have any stations out of gasoline. And unfortunately, that's probably going to happen, and that really bothers me.
AAA says the price of a gallon of gas has shot up more than 7 cents in the last week. The new national average now more than $2.98, the highest in 6 years. Oil analyst Tom Kloza says with some stations now selling 4 times the norm, the national average will soon top $3.
When everybody scrambles, it's like everyone scrambling to go through a revolving door. You have problems. And we're seeing that behavior right now. It has spread like wildfire.
It is a new damper on what the travel industry hoped would be the start of a rebound beyond just road trips. In Atlanta, the world's second busiest airport, says it is looking for additional fuel suppliers. American Airlines is even adding stops to a few of its longer flights, unable to top off all the way. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm calls this a supply crunch rather than a gas shortage.
There was no cause for, say, hoarding toilet paper at the beginning of the pandemic. There should be no cause for hoarding gasoline.
And that was Jennifer Granholm, US Energy Secretary, ending that report by CNN's Pete Muntean. Let's get to some of your feedback before 6, also on the Chris Hipkins interview earlier in the program and the vaccine rollout. This listener says, as a vulnerable person, there is absolutely no sign of me getting either a COVID or flu injection. Already 2 months late, 2 exclamation marks, they say. It's outrageous. They just keep changing the numbers. So, New South Wales can secure 1 million doses of Pfizer at short notice to roll out in a few weeks, says this listener. Why can't we? Another person's got in touch to say under 16s, according to my GP, it will be next year before over 80s living in the community get the vaccine if you're in the Canterbury DHB area. And Tim says it seems we may not have enough vaccines to last until the end of July, despite being assured 2 months ago we had plenty to go around. Over 65s, we're promised a vaccine by the end of April, then May and June, now maybe even later.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leata tēnei. A 21-year-old man has pleaded guilty to sexual offending at the Gloria Vale Christian community on the West Coast. The man admitted 3 representative charges of indecent assault against teenage boys following an appearance in the Greymouth District Court this afternoon. The offending occurred at Gloria Vale between 2015 and 2018, when the man was himself a teenager. He has been remanded on bail to appear for sentencing in September. The Health Minister Andrew Little has told patients and their supporters that the government has heard their plea for more funding for medicines. The advocacy group Patient Voice Aotearoa staged protests across the country today. It's calling on the government to double Pharmac's budget immediately and triple it within 2 years to just over $3 billion. Addressing the crowd outside Parliament, Mr Little thanked his parliamentary colleagues, who he says are committed to making things better.
It is the job of all of us to make sure we have a health system, all parts of a health system, that serves the needs of all New Zealanders, that is there to provide the support and the treatment, the diagnosis that all New Zealanders need when they need it.
Andrew Little says Pharmac strives to ensure it spends its billion-dollar budget in the way that provides the maximum support to the maximum number of New Zealanders. The National Māori Authority is urging politicians to pull themselves back from what it says is a descent into racial divides. The organisation's chair, Matthew Tukaki, says ongoing racially charged rhetoric will set Māori Crown relations back decades. The National Party is being criticised after its leader Judith Collins accused the government of pursuing policies of racist separatism. Mr Tukaki says this type of dog whistle politics serves race relations no good and pits one group of people against another. Meanwhile, Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi was ejected from Parliament today for doing a haka over what he claims was racist rhetoric. Retailers hope capping the fees banks charge businesses for contactless credit card transactions is just the beginning of improvements to the sector. A retail payment systems bill will be introduced later this year to regulate merchant service fees. It's expected to save businesses $74 million a year. The Chief Executive of Retail NZ, Greg Harford, says lowering the fees will help businesses but could go further.
This is a great first step. I think we'd really like to encourage the government to be looking at the whole of the merchant fee that is being charged, not just the interchange component of that.
Greg Harford says retailers that apply a surcharge for the bank fees are likely to pass on the costs savings to consumers. The United Nations Middle East Peace Envoy is warning that the conflict between Israel and Palestinians in Gaza is escalating towards full-scale war. Violence in the region has intensified, with Palestinian militants firing hundreds of rockets deep into Israel, some targeting the city of Tel Aviv. Israel carried out heavy airstrikes on Gaza, including the deliberate destruction of 2 tower blocks. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning Hamas and Islamic Jihad over their actions.
Hamas and Islamic Jihad have paid, and I tell you here, they will pay a very high price for their aggression. I say here tonight, their blood will be on their heads.
The Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh has said the group is ready if Israel seeks escalation. A COVID-19 landmark has been reached, with 500,000 people expected to be vaccinated against COVID-19 in the next fortnight. The COVID-19 response minister Chris Hipkins says that is a higher than planned number. So far, 388,000 doses have been administered, 83,000 more than at the same time last week. Mr Hipkins says 120,000 people have received their second dose. Meanwhile, 2 COVID-19 vaccination centres in Auckland are pausing a trial of walk-in services from tomorrow due to high demand. The Northern Region Health Coordination Centre says the sites at the Mount Wellington and Highbrook areas are reaching capacity, and there are increasing concerns about traffic flow and long queues. Both sites are seeing a high volume of walk-ins since they began trialling the model last week. The 2 centres will continue to take booked appointments while assessing what changes may be needed. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The All Blacks loose forward Shannon Frizzell has dropped from the Highlanders side for their Super Rugby Trans-Tasman opener against the Queensland Reds on Friday. Frizzell is the subject of a police investigation into an alleged assault at a Dunedin night spot last weekend. Highlanders Chief Executive Roger Clark says the omission is not punishment, as no charges have been laid, and Frizzell agreed with the decision.
It's not a decision that any rugby player wants to make, but I think the bottom line is he probably agrees that the distraction's been too much for him, and for him to be able to focus to play a game of rugby at the level that he's capable of this weekend, well, it wasn't going to work for him.
Black Caps wicket-keeper BJ Watling is contemplating coaching, having announced he's retiring from all cricket after the upcoming tour of England. The 35-year-old has been a stalwart of the Test side since debuting as an opening batsman in 2009, before reinventing himself as a keeper. If he plays the 2 tests against England and the Test Championship final against India, Watling will surpass Adam Parore as New Zealand's most capped keeper.
In the last sort of 4 or 5 months, I've realised my time is up, and I would still like to finish on a massive high with a big tour, though. The next 6 months or so, I'll just kind of wing it at this stage. And I'll start to look into what options I have after the game.
Manchester City may not be done for the season after securing English football's Premier League title this morning. City can win their first European title if they beat Chelsea in the Champions League final at the end of the month. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our Wind on the World goes in search of Jack Ma, the missing billionaire owner of the web company Alibaba. Jadwiga Green talks about living at the margins of gender and reason and how living in a psych ward prepped her for a new career in stand-up comedy, which will go well with this week's Hump Prize, Male Tears. Benjamin Myers' meditation on what it means to be a bloke these days. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The upper North Island from Taranaki, Taupo and Bay of Plenty northwards, partly cloudy, a few showers, possibly heavy and thundery in Bay of Plenty and Taupo tonight, clearing tomorrow morning to fine weather. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, occasional rain, possibly heavy overnight, easing to a few showers in Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairirapa, periods of rain, clearing overnight, generally fine tomorrow. Nelson becoming fine this evening with any patchy rain soon clearing. Marlborough and Canterbury, cloudy areas and a few showers, clearing overnight. Fine tomorrow, apart from some coastal cloud. Bulletu, Fiordland and Otago and Southland, fine with cloudy periods in Fiordland tomorrow. Chatham Islands, partly cloudy, a few showers, clearing tomorrow morning. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā e ho. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Politicians, end the race debate and get on with your jobs. That short, sharp message from the chair of the National Māori Authority. In the latest political nāla, Te Pāti Māori MP Rawiri Waititi was booted out of the House after expressing offence at what he called racist propaganda and rhetoric towards tangata whenua by the National Party over the past fortnight. At the time, Judith Collins was grilling the PM about He Puapua, a report into how to uphold Indigenous rights. Ngā Ngaru Rotahi o Aotearoa, the National Māori Authority, is made up of individuals, iwi, Māori business and academics. Its chair is Matthew Tukaki and he joins me now. Kia ora, Matthew.
Kia ora, good to be with you.
Who are you giving a serve?
Oh, look, I think all sides deserve a bit of a serve here. I mean, look, no one's covering themselves in glory. And this is at a time when we have some really brutal statistics emerging, not only as a result of COVID-19, but the sort of stuff that's been amplified as a result of the pandemic. You know, we're faced with the housing crisis. We still have those high suicide rates. Mental health is writ large. We've got kids going hungry in schools. I mean, you name it. And while all of this is happening and where we should be concentrating our efforts, instead we're descending into madness, and we're using race as a card out of the old sort of Don Brash playbook from years ago. Well, that didn't work out for National. It took years for John Key to try and restore themselves to the centre, and yet here we are again. And like I say, it's not just a national issue. National Party and Judith Collins, the weaponisation of the race card is writ large right across the political divide, and we need
Give me some examples, Matthew. What are you talking about in recent times that you would regard as playing the race card?
Well, I'll give an example. The classic, let's just ignore the fact that Māori do, in fact, have intrinsic rights under Te Tiriti, under the Treaty of Waitangi. Let's ignore that whole partnership thing that we've all been trying to work on for the last many decades, more than 100 plus years. Let's ignore that part, and that's what's been coming out of the rhetoric in terms of National the last few days. But the one that stood out for me, in fact, the two things that have stood out for me, number one has been when Judith Collins played the card about, well, what about Pacifica people? Well, hang on. In doing so, what now you're doing is saying, well, Pacific, you speak for Pacific people too, Judith? And you're using them as an example about what about them versus Māori? No, cut that out. And the other one too is this whole use of turn of phrase about apartheid, segregation and separatism. And that's been used by a multiplicity of people, both on social media, in the media, and in particular through the National Party conference the other weekend, and to frame up that somehow Māori in the context of some sort of apartheid or segregation movement. I mean, apartheid was a terrible evil, unfolding of history in South Africa, and segregation was terrible in the United States. Are we now saying that somehow Māori are forcing that sort of system on people? So there are two examples, and then there's this play on he puapua. He puapua is like many documents that find their way into governments of all colours that have been developed by external parties and people that may or may not frame up something that may or may not end up having a role, but it elicits discussion and debate. No one's suggesting that this is policy.
Yeah, how do we have that debate, Matthew, in terms of when we're dealing with potentially contentious issues or interesting, and some people may regard them as radical ideas, how do we have an open debate that is constructive without crossing the line into what you were saying is inappropriate conversation?
Calmly and collectively. There's a lot to be said for sitting down and having a hui, having a meeting, a conversation to work ourselves through the issues on all sides. Look, every New Zealander, Māori, non-Māori, anyone in between, has a right to have a role in this discussion. For example, no one party can solve the housing crisis. It's going to take ideas from across the political divide from all sectors of the community, so let's get together and figure out what those ideas are. I mean, look, to be frank, if we want to really have an honest conversation about all the elements of Te Tiriti, the future of the Treaty of Waitangi, let's have a constitutional forum. Let's have all parties at the table about what that might look like. I think what we do is we descend into madness before sitting down and having a conversation with each other. And I liken it, and I do this myself, and I know this might sound a very simple thing to do, but we've forgotten the art of the cup of tea, Lisa. We've forgotten the art of the cup of tea of sitting down and working with each other as neighbours instead of as neighbours at war.
Okay, Matthew, do you want to have a cup of tea and a kōrero with anyone in particular here?
Oh, look, I would be happy to sit down and have a cup of tea with Judith Collins and the National Party. I'd love to have a cup of tea with David Seymour and ACT. Equally, I would love to have a cup of tea with Labour, the Māori Party. In fact, wouldn't it be great if we all just had a cup of tea together? And in particular, try and find a way through of how we stop playing this descent into madness over playing race cards. Look, I get that National are trying to rebuild themselves. I get that Labour's trying to hold on to that Māori ground. I get that the Māori Party is somewhere in the middle with trying to attract further Māori vote, and I get what the ACT Party is attempting to do, and here we all are focusing all of that time and attention on that political jockeying for position. Well, actually, I would argue strongly that Māori in particular and most New Zealanders are absolutely sick of it. We're tired. The pandemic has exhausted us all. We've got people in our community that are just struggling to keep their heads above water. Let's get back to focusing on the kaupapa, play the ball, not the game.
Okay, so in Parliament today, Rawiri Waititi was kicked out of the House. Debbie Ngāriwa rose to ask a question, and this question was shut down. It was directed at the Prime Minister, and I'm wondering if you could take a crack at answering it for me. This was the question from Debbie Ngāriwa to the Prime Minister. Can you please give your view on whether the Leader of the Opposition's continued attack on Māori is racist? What's your answer to that question, Matthew?
My answer is any casual observer would probably agree. Look, Judith's not covering herself in glory here. I agree that what Judith is playing is a race card, and quite frankly, she's appearing to be racist in her remarks. For example, somehow saying that there is no racism within the New Zealand Police. The Police Commissioner has said it himself, there is racism in the New Zealand Police. So it leads any casual observer to agree. Actually, Judith, by your comments and by your actions, you are coming across as a racist, and that's not going to help you. It's not going to help your party. It's not going to help you get re-elected or elected into government. So can we please just cut it out?
So you're going to give her a call, ask her for a cuppa?
oh, look, I'll give her a call. I mean, they see me around the building hanging around like you know what, a monkey in a ball game. But I mean, look, here's the thing. It's not just about Judith Collins. It's also about the broader message that we need to send to every politician in that house. When people turn on their TVs and they watch Question Time and they watch these debates, they want to see a contest of ideas, of really good policies that will actually start solving these problems. Now, a contest of ideas is where we used to be in this country. You know what, if you disagree with Labor, you put up an alternative policy. You disagree with National, you put up an alternative policy. And I hate to be brutal about it, but if these fellas and fellasses in that house over there aren't prepared to do the jobs we've all elected them to do, then woe betide them in 2 years' time. A lot of them are going to be looking for employment.
Ngā mihi mō te rā. That's Matthew Tukake joining us there from our studio in Wellington, and he's from the National Māori Authority, the chair there, calling on politicians to basically cool it when it comes to the, racially charged language and debate. It is 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. New Zealand's massive COVID-19 vaccine stockpile is being whittled away, with the government revealing it may completely run out earlier than anticipated. It could mean the immunisation program is forced to slow down for several weeks in June before the next big restock in July. The immunisation program is expected to pass the 500,000 jab mark within the next fortnight. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Welcome to the weekly COVID vaccine update. Another case of self-congratulation.
I'm very pleased to report that over the last week we've ticked off a number of additional milestones in our vaccination rollout.
Here are the latest stats from the Minister Chris Hipkins. 120,000 people now fully vaccinated and close to 389,000 doses administered. That's almost 24,000 more than what the government had anticipated for this point of the program.
Overall, we're tracking ahead of plan.
Indeed, some DHBs are massively overperforming. Mid Central has delivered 166% of its plan. Nelson Marlborough, 153%. The Bay of Plenty, 146.
A special thanks to the teams working there.
But that success is a double-edged sword. New Zealand is eating away at its vaccine stockpile, a stash of now just 350,000 doses. It's topped up by another 60 or 70,000 more every week, but it won't be till July that several major batches are expected to arrive.
We are certainly delivering more than we are receiving at the moment, running down that stockpile that we have, which is, it erodes away by the day, and we fully expect to be through that by the end of June. If we get through that by mid-June, then yes, we will have to slow down for a period.
And that's exactly what the government had hoped to avoid. Adding to the pressure is people turning up to clinics for a jab without an appointment. The message from the top, please book ahead. And if you're not yet eligible, wait.
Everybody wants one, which is great. Very reassured by the fact that there is high demand for vaccines, but we simply won't have the supply to be able to give them to everybody all at once.
The matter is very much on the ministry's radar. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says his officials have been in touch with the DHBs to discuss how best to match supply with demand.
There's a big difference between a very small DHB delivering 150% of its target and say our Auckland region. So we're working very closely with all the DHBs just to get the balance right.
The epidemiologist Professor Michael Baker says what is most important is what percentage of the high-risk border workforce is fully vaccinated. Everybody else is less pressing.
We know that they will eventually all be covered, and it's not quite so urgent for those groups compared with the first group. So what the key performance indicator at the moment, I think, is what's our coverage like of those exposed populations, so the top priority group.
And that figure has been hard to track down. The ministry released a breakdown of its vaccination data today by gender, ethnicity and age, but not by priority group. Atu i te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch ahau.
Australia's tourism sector has slammed the federal government over its forecasts for the border reopening. The budget predicts the border will reopen in the middle of next year, but is based on the assumption the vaccine rollout will be done by the end of the year. The tourism sector says it's being treated like a second-class citizen and says businesses will go under if they have to wait that long for international visitors. But the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, says the estimates are cautious given how unpredictable COVID is.
When it comes to that international border closure, again, that's an assumption, not a policy decision. It's an assumption that the borders will gradually reopen from next year, but important to that is how the virus is being contained or indeed spreading around the rest of the world.
The New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, wants to see the borders reopen earlier than mid-2022.
Oh, look, I'm always very ambitious. I'm probably more ambitious than what was there. I'd like to see us really work as fast as we can to get our population vaccinated, and that's why the New South Wales government was the first to step up and say, let the states help, which we're doing. And I'm really grateful to the people of New South Wales for responding. I mean, overnight we had 23,000 people who got tested for COVID. So far, the latest figures I've had nearly 75,000 people have registered their interest to get the Pfizer vaccine. So there's opportunities for us to move as quickly as we can, and I'm really keen to see that happen.
Qantas has delayed its plans to restart international flights by at least 2 months in response to the government's revised schedule. It had earmarked late October to begin its international offerings, but has pushed that back to the end of the year. Countdown workers in Dunedin have returned to the store for a blessing today after 2 were caught up in a stabbing attack. The company will make a decision tomorrow about when it will reopen. Today, staff met with the union to talk about whether they're ready to go back to work. Our reporter Louise Tanuth spoke to First Union's Tali Williams shortly after the meeting.
I guess the key thing is that there's still a very strong feeling across a lot of people that they're not quite ready to go back into the workplace. For some, going to the karakia this morning was important to them, but it was difficult to be in that physical space again, or around that physical space where they've experienced something so traumatic. So when in discussions with them today, we've been talking about what people feel they need in terms of safety and security going forward, and also what they want us to be feeding back to Countdown management regarding opening of the store.
And what are some of those recommendations? I mean, are people still wanting to remain closed for a few days? What's the general consensus?
I think that it's fair to say that a majority of people are still not ready to go back to work, and I think that's really fair in terms of what people have experienced. The good thing is that Countdown have agreed to ensure those people are not financially disadvantaged, so they'll continue on pay when they're not, if they're not feeling quite ready to go back into the workplace. But they're sort of reviewing, I guess, the feedback overnight, and tomorrow morning they've said they'll make a decision about whether to open the store or not. The key thing for us, whether they open it or not, is making sure that no one is rushed back into the workplace when they're not ready.
So it could be a staggering of staff in terms of who's comfortable and who's not. It may not be that everyone comes back. And so that could mean, maybe different hours or different shifts looking forward.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it would look like. Come clear from the discussions with members today is that the importance for them of round-the-clock security coverage in terms of security guard presence, and that's something that Countdown have committed to for the next month, and obviously it's something we'll continue to advocate for beyond that month as well. I think for members it's going to be really important to know that that will be there ongoing.
So those security measures, just to be clear, are we talking a security guard, more security guards, or something different entirely? What does that actually look like?
Well, it just means round-the-clock coverage, basically. And I understand, too, from Countdown that there'll be a police presence there for the next few days as well. I don't know how long that goes on for. People feel safer when they know that the security guard will always be there.
And were they frustrated that perhaps the security guard hadn't been there previously? I know people have said that, Countdown has said that they felt that particular store didn't need it, but I mean, based on the events that have happened.
I think the specific thing that happened on Monday, I don't think necessarily a security guard would have been able to stop that. The more people present, the more that would have got hurt.
How would you describe the feeling amongst workers just a few days after what's happened?
Still, people are incredibly shaken. I think it's important for us all to take stock of how that might feel for ourselves in our own workplaces if we witness what they witnessed. The other thing we've got coming up is next Tuesday we're meeting with Countdown Senior Management to talk about our concerns or our members' concerns about security and safety on a national basis rather than just in that one store. So I guess what we've started doing is surveying our membership about what it is that they'd like to see change regarding safety and security and what would make them feel safer at work. And we'll be raising those in the meeting next Tuesday with Countdown Management.
Can you elaborate any more on what some of that feedback is on a national basis?
More staff would help because it does seem to provide a deterrent from that kind of behaviour, or even when it doesn't, that you feel safer when there are other people around you to turn to if something awful happens. Adequate lighting and CCTV cameras.
And people feel as though they're being listened to?
Well, let's find out tomorrow morning, I guess.
And that was reporter Louise Tanu speaking to retail representative from First Union, Tali Williams. More than 100 people have reported waking up with a foreign accent, sometimes from a place they've never visited. Most say it happened after surgery or a stroke. CNN's Jenny Moose reports on the foreign accent syndrome.
Angie Yen is counting the days on TikTok.
It's day 2. It's day 10 since I woke up with an Irish accent.
Problem with that is she's Australian.
I woke up with an Irish accent, and I've never been to Ireland before.
The 27-year-old dentist shocked herself when she began singing in the shower with an Irish accent. This was 9 days after surgery to have her tonsils removed.
I'm completely freaked out.
This is how her Aussie accent used to sound.
I'm just calling to cancel my membership, and I was just wondering for the monthly payments that I've paid.
Now she sounds like this.
And my sister's like, oh no, I've got an Irish sister now.
The most likely culprit, the rare but very real foreign accent syndrome, which occurs after a head injury, stroke, or just plain old surgery.
It's not a real foreign accent, but rather a damaged form of the person's native language and accent.
Angie gets messages saying she's faking, that it's BS.
Hi, Owen. Unfortunately, it's not fake. It's now day 13 since I woke up with a foreign accent.
Her accent remains changed, though the similarity to Irish comes and goes. There have been about 150 reported cases of foreign accent syndrome. This Florida woman had a stroke and went from sounding like this.
We've got fabulous things.
To this.
I felt like I was going bloody crazy.
And after Karen Butler from Oregon was sedated to have teeth pulled, her accent changed from this.
Hi, this is Karen. Sorry, I can't come to the phone at the moment.
To this.
Talk to young girls, they think it's a very, very pretty sound, and they say, oh, I want an accent like that. Oh, well, just go see my dentist.
But Angie doesn't find her accent pretty. Sometimes she cries.
I'm losing my identity as an Aussie Asian. I don't feel like I belong.
But often she laughs, for instance, over her mother's reaction.
She said, can you go to church now? And I was like, Mom, why? I'm not possessed.
Mom wants her to pray, but at least now she says she can hit higher notes.
When will my reflection show who I am inside?
And that report was from Jenny Moose. Some more of your feedback before we head off on the COVID vaccination rollout. This from Davey. Davey's got a question for Chris Hipkins. Minister, what would you say in mid-May to a chap aged 75 who has not only received no notification of the possibility of receiving the vaccination, but cannot find online the slightest indication of when this might happen, other than a map that exists which shows variation from region to region and puts Taranaki in a bad light? Cheers, Davey. Sorry, didn't get the chance to ask that, but let's see if we can in the future. And this one, we don't have COVID present in the country nor high death rates like overseas. We cannot control the supply and timing of the vaccine in the country. We will get there. On the subject of the Māori Party and the race debate, this person says politicians need to stop talking about race-based policy. A Māori health authority is nothing to do with race. It's about giving effect to the founding document of the nation. A deal is a deal, and we need to get on with making it happen. Thanks for your feedback. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Health Minister says the government has heard patients' pleas for more funding for Pharmac. A COVID-19 landmark has been reached, with 500,000 people expected to be vaccinated against COVID-19 in the next fortnight. A 21-year-old man has pleaded guilty to sexual offending against teenaged boys at the Gloria Vale Christian community and will be sentenced in September. National's Judith Collins doesn't accept that she is using Parliament as a forum for Māori bashing. The National Māori Authority is urging politicians to pull back from a descent into racial divides. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Certainly the season's been a real challenge. Our final crop numbers will be well down on last year, which for us means over $100 million.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
To see this plant that looks almost like rhubarb, it can be confusing. It's like, what's that doing there? And then they could be tempted to pull it out.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen. Brian Crump getting ready for another night on RNZ National. But before I do, we've got this